Today's one slot is on press freedom, and we are taking on a publication by the Guardian newspaper on how Ethiopia went from celebrating journalists to jailing them. I'm Felicity Ezewike. The 2025 World Press Freedom Index by Reporters Without Borders, that's the RSF, reveals that economic fragility is a significant threat to press freedom in Africa. Countries like Nigeria dropped 10 places to 122nd, Sierra Leone 56th, and Cameroon 131st. They are struggling with economic pressures that compromises media independence. But beyond the economic pressures, there are countries in Africa where press freedom is entirely absent, and practicing journalism is particularly dangerous. This is classed under the red map, the very serious category this year. 7 African countries have moved to this part of the map. Uganda, for instance, is 143rd, Ethiopia 145th, and Rwanda 146th. Again, Burundi dropped 17 places to 125th, which is very near the bottom of the index. Now, Ethiopia's situation is particularly dire. Since 2022 conflict in Tigray, the government has cracked down on independent media, citing national security concerns. This has led to mass arrests, detention, and widespread self-censorship. Ethiopia's ranking in the RSF index plummeted from 110 in 2019 to the 145 that I mentioned earlier. Most journalists there now practice self-censorship. One editor told The Guardian that many independent media just repeat government statements. When asked why to these journalists, they say, and I'm quoting him now, "I have children. I need to survive," end quote. So, today on One Slot, we're going to discuss the state of press freedom and the Ethiopia reality as much as we can. May I just say, just to buttress what I mentioned in my introduction, the situation in Ethiopia continues to be concerning. We reached out to a couple of journalists and media persons. They were willing to speak, and at some point they said, okay, no, we don't want our faces to show. And then at the last minute, some of them pulled out, and the conditions they were given wasn't conducive for a live program. Again, this is worrying. But we are honored. Tamsaka was here last week, and the very last minute, he obliged us to speak on the subject of press freedom. As a journalist, he's also an African affairs analyst. It's a pleasure to welcome you to One Slot. Also joining us...
Thank you to your listeners for listening.
Also joining us is a professor, assistant professor. Okay, I'll introduce him when he's able to connect. He's joining us virtually as well. Again, thank you, Tamsaka, for giving us your time. Let's begin with maybe a reminder of what press freedom really is and why it matters so much. I mean, we keep talking about it all the time as journalists.
Yeah, it is quite fair. Press freedom is very important because by and large, which is the fourth state, if you like. So the members of the public or even people who are outside, people who want to invest in a country, people who want to visit a country as tourists, or even people in government, they all depend on authentic reporting by the press. So the expectation and this is why by and large we had self-censorship or these bodies that are self-regulating in terms of the media. The idea of media has always been you are or we are the authentic voice that everyone depends on. If a government wants to know what people think, outside their intelligence information gathering, they would rely on the media. If people in general want to know what is going on, they will rely on the media, which is why, by and large, what you have is a requirement that whenever you cover a story, you are going to take one part of the conversation and then you have to balance it by cross-checking those facts. Is this that I'm being told factual? Can it stand in a court of law? Is it true? You know, that veracity element, there's a tick box that we do have to follow from an editorial point of view, and giving everyone the right to be heard. So, and I think when we talk about press freedom in the context that you were referring to, when in places like Ethiopia, where there are several areas that have conflict going on, then it becomes tricky. It becomes tricky when either the government or some people who are armed, there might be militia, there might be rebels, there might be other non-state actors. If any of them believe that as a journalist you are unfairly reporting, or you are now promoting the cause of one part of the conflict or the other, that brings so many risks, Felicity.
Perception and truth. I mean, sometimes people say they don't always, they're not always the same. But before we explore what's happening in Ethiopia, let's talk about the index for a bit. The RSF brand is a trusted one when it comes to assessing press freedom and journalists' welfare. What's your assessment of their key submissions this year? I think one of the most prominent was the impact of economic pressures on media.
Economic pressures, yes, but it is always about who funds what, isn't it? So even the index itself, one has to look, if we are, the true journalists that we want people to believe that we are, the first thing he has to find out is who actually funds them, whose interests are they promoting. So if they are putting Africa as failing in the, index, compared to, let's say, a country like Ukraine, or maybe, what is happening in the Middle East, where journalists are not allowed at all. I mean, you can't go to Gaza to report, full stop. In Ukraine, you are just not allowed in certain conflict areas. So and if you are in America or you are in Europe, there are certain lines that you can cross. They have all these, regulatory bodies that they have that regulate what you can or cannot say. So most people just don't cross that line. So I always find it very difficult when I see that, places like Africa or places that are considered, on the other side of the Western narrative, are considered to be, the ones that are failing on this index. It becomes problematic, but that's our job as journalists. So you would say, if you go to America, you know how to report. If you go outside that line, you will either be in trouble with the law or you will be told that you can't be in that country. People like Julian Assange and others, they will tell you that you can't cross a line when you are in certain areas, especially if what you are doing or what you are reporting is believed to be a threat to national security. Those things are well defined. But the challenge comes when we present Africa or, a place like Nigeria or Cameroon that you mentioned, or Sierra Leone, or even Ethiopia. If we present those countries as countries that don't have freedom, full stop, and then we take our journalism as activism in a certain cause, then you are already crossing that line, which is something that does not give you an opportunity to do if you're in France or you're in Germany or you're in the United Kingdom or you're in America, because that opportunity to say you're crossing the line, you're trying to free people or a country doesn't quite exist. So I guess you have to read these index or barometers or whatever you want to call them in the context within which they are done. Who funds it? What were they trying to achieve? Are they trying to warn people in terms of how you should behave if you go to these countries? Are they seeking to assist probably a political position in those countries? Because I think journalists know how to behave, and I would like to think that press freedom should be what it should be, defined by that state, but you should be able to report freely but also within the confines of the laws of that country where you are.
Well, freely, just like I said, truth and perception is an argument. Truth and perception is an argument that we have every time. But freely, again, is where we have the issue. How free is the press? Let's talk about the one of the highlights of this report is that the relationship between press freedom and economic development in Africa, especially as it affects the journalists.
I'm not sure there's that correlation that can actually be made. Some of the things might be coincidence. There are other places where you are free to say what you want, to report what you want, but then there are some people who might use that freedom. Okay, I'll give you an example that I once gave to other people at some major conference, but I'm happy to repeat it here. If you are working in a country where you hardly have any press freedom, and you certainly get it, there are some people for political reasons who then can abuse that, who are not necessarily journalists, but people who then just operate within that media space, especially social media and other places. And whatever they say, they will then say, no, there's no press freedom in these countries, but they are not trained journalists, they are not accredited journalists, but there are people who then just come into that media space. It is equivalent to say if you are coming to a traffic light or maybe a pedestrian crossing on a road. If you are a passenger, you go to a pedestrian crossing, you've got the right of way, so cars will stop, vehicles will stop to allow you within reason to cross the road. But then if you go and take your guitar and then say you've got the right of way, you go and lie down in the middle of the road just because it's a pedestrian crossing, there's an ambulance coming, there's a fire brigade engine coming. You are now abusing that space because you are compromising other people. So our freedom in press should not be a threat to national security. It should not be something that maybe a government perceives will be doing more harm to the country and its citizens, because we can cost lives in the manner that we report. Our job is to report the truth as we see it, to balance all sides, but also to be sensitive to the laws of the country, to make sure that we don't incite, to make sure that we preserve justice. And there are so many examples, even in the West, when you go back to France and what used to happen in the old days when there were, other people who reported on intelligence operations that were being undertaken. But at that time, the newspapers or the journalists, Le Monde, I remember one example in the old days very clearly, because I was in France at the time. So you'd find that they will be told that you are compromising national security, you are compromising investigations, you are costing more lives by reporting on things that you shouldn't, even if they are true. So it's not that easy, which is why I always emphasize that when we talk about press freedom, when we talk about the freedom of expression, it must be by journalists who are accredited. We have done training, we have done media training, we know this. We know and understand the laws of the country. We know and understand
let me come in here,
why it is important.
Let me come in, and I'm getting the picture, but it's not quite clear. Perhaps this next question will help clear that out. What are some of the common myths or misconceptions about press freedom in Africa? We know for sure that it cannot be one size fits all. That's the implication of some of the things you've said. But what are some of the common myths when it comes to this press freedom we talk about?
I wouldn't call them myths. Let me give you an example. But that example, I will take it outside the context of Africa, because I think for people to understand what these things are all about, especially when you talk about national security or things that you must know as journalists, but you are not necessarily going to report them just because they are true, because it might be against what the government is trying to do at the time. So I'll give you an example and say that if you were a journalist some years ago during the time, during the Afghanistan, when there was a war in Afghanistan and you had NATO forces there, you had British troops there, one of the members of the royal family in Britain, Prince Harry, was deployed in Afghanistan. Now, the media was aware that he was there. There was a briefing. The editors were aware that he was there. But what they did is you were not allowed to report that Prince Harry was actually deployed in Afghanistan, because what that would have meant was, although it was true, reporting it would have meant that you are putting most of the NATO forces and bases at higher risk, because it would have meant that the Taliban or whoever else was fighting the NATO forces in Afghanistan would have thought, if there is actually a prince who is deployed, then that means they will do anything that they can to try and find him. So the risk becomes higher. So media were not reporting that he was there. They only started reporting that he was there when he had actually left. So I'm giving you this example to say, press freedom, yes, you might have information about what's something that is happening in Nigeria or in Cote d'Ivoire or in Mali or wherever. Just the fact that you have the briefing, you have that information, doesn't mean it is right for you then to report about it, because you might actually putting other people and lives at risk. So this is the issue that happens. So you get to countries where there might be conflict, or where there might be other people who are trying to topple a government, or where there are maybe political elements that the government of the day believes that is being influenced by people that are coming from outside, or they might think that as journalists were being used by other people to cover up for corruption, or we have been paid, or all that kind of stuff.
I think
so your reporting then becomes compromised if they think you are khaki envelope journalist, or you are going to report on something that is against the national security of the country. So it's not that easy. Media law, national security issues are never going to be straightforward, which is why when people just report and they are not trained journalists, it compromises the profession itself and makes it difficult for people to know what's going on.
On a lighter note, I failed media law the first time I took it, and then I made a second attempt to try and pass. This is part of what we talk about, ethics of the profession. Do no harm as much as you can. That's what you've just explained extensively for us. I would have loved to talk about that truth, because, I mean, when you started, you talked about the importance of journalists speaking the truth and then trying to balance it out. And then you give us this analogy of, Prince Harry and delayed reporting. How does that impact the truth? I'd like you to mule on that. I'll come back to you, but I'd like to welcome our second guest. We're very glad he could join now. Assistant Professor, Political Science, Njibara University in Ethiopia. He's actually joining us from Russia. He's Agenang Kebede. I hope I got that right. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, the curious situation in Ethiopia does worry a lot of persons, and that's part of the reason we're having this conversation. What are your thoughts on press freedom in Ethiopia as it stands today?
Okay, actually, when we are talking about press freedom in Ethiopia, we need to go back to 1991. Starting from 1991, I mean, the promise of the PRDF, the People Revolutionary Democratic Front, of just allowing press freedom, was not hearing anything more. Then, starting from that time in Ethiopia, we have not seen such press freedom. And here, recently, after the internal reform, I mean, just I'm thinking about 2018. As you know, 2018, Abiy administration with his political party, Prosperity Party, just holding power, political power, and at the beginning of 2018, just there was a movement to allow press freedom, just a moment to allow journalists to free. Just to report things in free.
All right, Prof. Unfortunately, your audio is a bit unclear. We can barely get you, but I will try and come back to you in a bit. Hopefully, it will be better. Tamzaka, if you can take on the question I asked before we introduced Prof, and that is, let me just put it this way: truth delayed, justice delayed. Some people will say there is a relationship. You've explained why sometimes the truth is not always what you report at that time, but doesn't it contradict what we know as report the truth?
Yes, the truth, but then there's always the right time for the right truth. It's never that easy. It's so difficult, but I guess that is part of what the training for journalism is all about. That's why you always have editors. That is why when something goes wrong or goes right, you have these editors who take responsibility for something that will have been done. So if you take, I don't know, Ethiopia is quite complex because there are so many conflict areas going on. In the old days, whether you talk about during Mengistu's time, there were two kinds of media. There was one that was called the people that were under Zenawi, and then others that were.
It definitely cannot be black and white all the time. That's just what this is. And in order to practice the profession, you need to know the basics. So like what we have today, the age of the internet has made things a little hazy for everyone. But let's move a little and talk about how a lack of press freedom impacts democracy and governance in Africa.
I guess it is all about how that is defined. Free press in general, as long as it's not khaki envelope journalism, it will be fine. I don't think there will ever be an issue in Africa.
So, do we still have
and you are impartial? As long as you are impartial.
I'm sorry, but do we still have envelope journalism today? Do we still have that in real term? I know we have economic pressures, but do we still have journalists that compromise the integrity of their reportage for cash?
I want to believe that we don't, but I was just making a fourth point and say, if you I think in almost every country, I can think of so many people in Nigeria who are forthright. Whether you're in government or you're in opposition, you know that this journalist is going to be fair, is going to be balanced. They will report without fear or favor, whether the story is positive for you or it is compromising. They will always be consistent. Yet, if you also go to certain areas, there are other people who align themselves to a political side, and then they compromise their credibility as reporters or as journalists in that way, that they are always going to go with their political side. They will give someone a free ride in interviews, or they will, try to suppress or, have a way of managing stories, and then they will, overblow if it's coming from somebody else, especially when people that are doing it in social media. That is a kind of journalism that you see, especially in America. President Obama at some point removed the requirement to be balanced. So what you have seen is what we call the Fox News approach in journalism, where you can have a channel that just goes with one particular storyline, and if you are coming from a political opposition, they are going to give you a tough time if they give you that opportunity. In other words, they won't even give you that opportunity.
Isn't that an example of
report one-sided? In Africa, it's quite different.
Okay.
Most people will need to balance the story at all times.
Okay, I was just going to interject, but considering how, I know it's just an instance, but considering how popular Fox is, isn't that setting a precedent that is detrimental to the future of the freedom of the press as we know it?
In a way, you can say the Fox model, as it was introduced during President Barack Obama's time, one might say it's another version of press freedom. It's one that doesn't give you an obligation to hear the other side. So, you know, if we look in Nigeria, for instance, there's this issue that has been going on about, you know, a senator or, you know, a suspended senator and the speaker or the president of the Senate. So if you wanted to take the Fox model, you could take one side and just go with it without giving the other one the right to be heard. It might work, it might not work. It appears to be working in America, where those that are Republican supporters will just say it's their press freedom, they'll say what they want. Those that support the Democrats will say this is them, they will not give somebody else an opportunity. But in Africa, we are not there yet. We are in a zone where we need to balance the story. If you are reporting on somebody or on something or an organization, make sure that you have given them the right of response. You have given them facts as you know them before you can publish. Even if it is something as simple as somebody else has been seen with someone else's wife, you basically need the facts and to give everyone the right of response.
All right.
This is where we are.
All right, Prof, let's try one more time and see if we can actually hear you. I was asking you about your assessment of what press freedom is like today in Ethiopia. Oh, okay, I understand we lost him again, so we'll stay with Tamzaka, but we need to go on a short break. When we come back, the conversation continues. It is about press freedom. Thank you for staying with us. We're still looking at press freedom and the Ethiopian reality. Unfortunately, our guest, Professor Kebede, we're having issues having him alive now. We'll try that again. Tamzaka Zois has been with us. He's been talking extensively about press freedom, of course, truth, and when to delay saying the truth. Very interesting angle, if you ask me. Tamzaka, let me just come to you and ask, while we wait to establish Prof, many Ethiopian journalists, I mean, the situation there is what we know what it is like, and most of them have been forced into exile or hiding due to persecution. What impact does this have on the media landscape in Ethiopia as it is today?
It is very difficult. What is happening in Ethiopia, I guess it's not just Ethiopia, it can be any area where there's conflicts. Even if you look at South Sudan or you look at Sudan itself, you look at other parts of Africa where there is conflict. But also not just conflict areas, but areas where there is political contestation. And, you know, it's very difficult. You just have to listen to, you know, whenever you have the regulatory authority media becoming prominent, becoming news, then you know there are challenges in that country. So the Ethiopian Media Authority, EMA, has been coming in and trying to address these issues. You know, people like Aman Fissenhausen with the EPS, you know, EPS, when it was formed, you know, many people were looking at that initiative as one that had input from the diaspora. There was progress. It was opening up the media space. But when you look at the case last March, you know, the one that involved that lady, Bertukan Temeskan, in the report or the documentary that they had done, that they were then, you know, forced to withdraw the apologies that they had to make live. I think Aman himself and even Bertukan herself made, you know, apologies. It's very difficult. So there are two possible things that are happening there. So the first is maybe whatever was part of the content was compromising the work of the army or the security, or was putting the army or the security in danger, or was painting a wrong picture, or if we believe their apologies, the story wasn't true. So the question then would be editorially, if the story wasn't true, why did you, flight it in the first place? Why didn't you verify that it was true? So it leaves so many questions. But it then tells other journalists that maybe it is not a safe environment to operate in, but it will be like that in any other conflict area. If you were a British reporter and you are reporting about the war in Iraq or the war in Afghanistan or what is happening in other parts of the world where British forces are involved, there are certain things that you can't report on. There are other things that you can report on. The same with the Americans. We have seen 3 cases, the WikiLeaks, and we have seen the case of one journalist who ended up in another country, and we also saw the issue with the military, or somebody who was in the military who was, said to have given out information that they should not have given out. So I guess in Africa, in Ethiopia, as other countries, we need to have ground rules. There are laws about how to report when there is conflict. What you can or cannot say. Sometimes you are embedded to the army, sometimes you are not, but it is not easy. So press freedom should be able to do a good within a community. And so if you have, the problems in the Oromia side or Amara, or where you have the Fano, the government called them militants, you have a difficulty. Which side are you reporting on? Because those that are fighting government forces will say they are right. The government will say it is right in trying to make sure that these people don't have their way. So where do you stand as a journalist? If you are reporting the truth, that truth will be according to which optics, and which good are you trying to promote when there is a conflict. So these things are not easy, they're not straightforward. Journalism is dangerous when it's in conflict areas. It is worth pursuing because it's all about justice, doing the greater good.
Yeah, just to,
and people die.
Just to add to what you're saying, CPJ, I think that's the Committee for the Protection of Journalists, released the report earlier this year, a special report. It tagged it, 2024 is the deadliest year for journalists in CPJ history, almost 70% killed by Israel, and it focused primarily on some of the conflict in Europe and the impact it had on journalists. So like you said, it depends on where you are and some of the ethics that operate there and some of the realities as regards conflict and all of that. Talking about that, I'm looking at, while you were talking, I almost lost my thought. While you were talking, I was thinking about the quality of training and the quality of journalists versus the quality of press freedom that we have today, or the ability for extraneous forces, whether economics, whether politics, to infiltrate and corrupt, the media space. What is your thoughts on that? And perhaps how can we get better journalists to practice other than the social media influenza, I would say?
Well, the majority of journalists that I know are very good and well-trained journalists. They know their job. They do an amazing job, even putting their lives at risk just to report and get things right and to make sure that the world is a better place. But of course, the courses that we attended when we were training, the people that you have in most of the newsrooms are still very good journalists, and there's very good leadership at almost every level. Of course, there can be countries where the khaki envelope aspect comes in, where there are certain people who want to sponsor some narratives, who probably want to pay people not to reports on issues of corruption or, when it's politically exposed people. That I get. But I would like to say that, Felicity, the majority of the training courses that are there around the world, they have stood the test of time. Those people are very good. But the only challenge that we have is with the regulatory authorities or the authorities that regulate media in almost every country. Who do they accredit, and who do they give credit to as the work of journalists? So there are countries that are very strict. You can't just go and claim to be a journalist if you have not actually done training as a journalist. It's like somebody, claiming that they are going to be a surgeon and they're going to operate on someone who needs an operation at the table in a theater, in a hospital. You can't do that if you haven't done the training that can be verified. So with journalism, because lives can be lost because of what people say or do or write or broadcast, so it is important that regulatory authorities in almost every country, if they are going to give accreditation that you are allowed to practice as a journalist, I think it's important that just because you have a Twitter handle or you have a social media platform, or
but
you're doing
I'm sorry to bust your bubble. I know perhaps
qualified.
I'm sorry to bust your bubble. Maybe where you are, that's what works. But we do know that social media influence, to some degree, here in Nigeria, I can speak, gives you some leverage over people who perhaps don't have a lot of following on social media to get, the prominence and become journalists without real training. It goes back to what you said about the regulatory authorities. How effective are they? And is there a way that their oversight functions can be better improved? And really, how do you monitor, for instance, you have countless media houses. How do you monitor the pedigree of individuals who parade themselves, which individual media houses produce? So come and be questioning them, how do you become a journalist?
Well, nothing stops the regulatory authorities from creating new or defining new categories. So if you are an influencer, you've got millions of people. Even if you're a professional, you might be a footballer, but you are an authentic voice when it comes to issues to do with football, but not necessarily a sports journalist. But it basically means that you can be given a certain category where if you make a mistake, whether it is breaching libel laws, defamation laws, or you have done something against the national security issues, anything that relates to the media laws, if you make a mistake, then you are judged and you are treated according to the category where you fall, which is different, which is why I was giving you that example of a doctor. If you are a doctor and you make a mistake, but you have been trained, you are registered, it is your registration and there are issues that will apply to you. But if you are not a doctor, you are just trying to help someone who you found, unconscious, you are treated also differently. So for me, I'm basically saying, I would want to see more people in the media space, especially social media. I would like to see more people participating, but I would want to see a distinction between a trained and accredited journalist and somebody who is operating within that space, but without the formal training. Because people should be able to say there was a mistake that was done. That mistake probably might cost lives, or it might cost somebody else, their job, their livelihood, or whatever.
To be fair,
if it was done by somebody who is not a trained journalist, then at least, journalism can't get that blame.
Yeah, to be fair, Tanzaka, I get you.
Somebody makes a mistake because they don't know the law. Hello?
Yes, I do get you. And to be fair, there is a clear distinction between journalists who went through the training and journalists who are just, going with the tide. That does exist. But I don't know. Let's just leave that and move on and look at a more positive...
No, Felicity. No, okay, so you might say that exists. It exists maybe in your eyes as a trained journalist. but it doesn't necessarily exist in the eyes of the general members of the public who consume Twitter feeds. Because you can have somebody with a very popular Twitter feed who is getting so many people to believe the stories that they tweet. They might be saying, oh, this is what I saw happening in Edo State, or in Port Harcourt, this is what I saw. Many people will follow that. And they will see that as an authentic.
Unfortunately, the world seems to be settling for less. It's the harsh truth. Because even when you see these people with a lot of following, if you're a discerning person, you should be able to tell the difference between those that are trained and those that are just going with the flow. We're time pressed, I'm sorry. So let's try and look at perhaps how journalists can survive and still thrive despite, some of this restriction. What would be some of the strategies you would suggest for media, not just journalists now, but media organizations to protect themselves from any kind of repression or censorship and still make impact?
It's all about adapting. In the old days, we were print journalists. That was the best. You ran around doing shorthand. You wanted to be the first to get to a story, to get it right, and put it out there with a scoop. That was the story then, and then we moved to broadcasting. It became faster, 24-hour news. It became so. For me, within the context of social media, media companies, journalists, and others, and other colleagues in the media space need to be able to adapt to what is wanted, but still maintaining the basics. You are telling the story that is true, you are telling it at the right time, and you are helping the world become a better place through your practice. And I think if we continue doing that, we'll be able to protect the profession so that there are younger journalists or aspiring kids in school who would want to be journalists and make that impact. But also, Felicity, journalists must write. I think writing books about your experiences, about things that you learn as you travel and report in different parts of the world, share that knowledge in the way of what you write. So I want to see more books that are written by journalists, not necessarily, even if, I know there are others that do ghost writing, but beyond ghost writing, I want to see more books written by journalists and their experiences, and also speaking out wherever you see injustice. I think that would be the way to go.
I agree with you. Talk to us, though, for situations like we have in Ethiopia, how can African government balance the need for national security? Because sometimes this is what they use to clamp down on press freedom, with the need for the press to be free, because that's how people can make informed decisions.
It is all about courage. It is courage to accept that political office is temporary, but also not everyone agrees with you just because you are in power. And the courage to be able to allow different voices will enable you in government to appreciate what is being said by other people that don't necessarily have access to you. And journalism can play that role. So allowing people to go out and report on things gives the government an opportunity to appreciate what is really being said by these people who are rebelling against the leadership or who are fighting against the leadership. So you then can address those issues. There's nothing that can be addressed, especially within the African context. People believe that you can only address things by talking, but you can only talk if you know what the other side is thinking or is going on about. So journalism can play that midwifery role, or at least be the go-between the different sides, because as press, you are allowed to be in different places without necessarily facing danger. So protect the journalists, let them tell you what's going on the other side, and then you can have an opportunity to solve the issues before you.
Okay, one thing we talked about, I don't know if we actually expanded a bit on it, is the economic pressures that journalists in many African countries have to work with. How can they build resilience in the face of, sometimes, fairly repressive working conditions? You have media organizations that all their staff, after perhaps 2 months, some 3 months, some as horrible at 7 months before they get paid. Yet, these journalists are expected to show up for work. I'm speaking in the context of Nigeria because this is where I operate. These journalists are expected to still show up for work and put in 100% when their salaries at the end of the month are not guaranteed. So talk to us about, building resilience and this conversation around side hustle, because now you have to have all the side hustle if you have to survive as a journalist.
Well, I think it should be about society in general appreciating how important journalism is, or information. If Facebook or those that have information for Facebook can be billionaires, then for me, as an advertising platform, it should then make sense that if you've got a channel in Nigeria, a country of more than 200 million people, just Nigeria alone, before you even talk about Africa, before you talk about diaspora, before you talk about a global media audience, just Nigeria alone, even if you were getting viewers that are 10% of that 200 million, 20 million people is still more than any of the American shows or European shows will ever do. So for me, if the NFL, Super Bowl or whatever, people can pay, I don't know, can pay $1 million for an advert that is going to be 10 seconds or 30 seconds, it defeats the logic for me to think that a country like Nigeria with 200 million people, even if a show was going to be able to be watched by 20 million people, then advertisers, even if you are a bank or some other company, you don't want to pay good money, because the media companies can only make money if those that advertise on the channel are advertising and paying good money and good rate. So the staff can only be paid from what the company will make. And I know that journalism costs a lot of money. But the other thing also is to follow probably more of the Fox model and the social media model, where you are having more people that are actually going with less teams. In the old days, we used to have a team of 6, 7 people to go in the field. You have the producer, the sound, the lighting, the camera. We had many people that we were taking out when I was reporting in the old days for a broadcast. Nowadays, you can have 2 people probably doing the same thing. The cost is coming down.
One person, actually.
I think that should translate to people getting more paid. getting paid more for the jobs that they're doing.
Yeah, you're even saying 2. One person is a one-man army these days. You have your tripod before you organize it's a one-man racehorse, but it is what it is. The reality of practicing journalism in today's world, it's not as glamorous as it used to be perhaps in your time when it was print. You have the freedom to do a lot of stuff. So give us your quick thoughts on, I really wanted to ask you this particular question. Let me see if I can find it. I'm going to make a quote. The great popularity of social media has helped to diversify media landscape, but has also contributed to disinformation. I want you to speak within that context for a bit, because now, everybody's saying adopt the social media trend. You need to use it. But how do we ensure that even then issues remain factual?
I think we have to, the best way is for regulatory authorities, in the UK it is Ofcom, in Ethiopia it is EMA, and then in Nigeria is well represented. You've got all those legal teams, and you've got the authority for broadcasting and news and all that. Because I know the people who used to run these, they were actually run in part by people who own newspaper companies or media companies. So for me, I would think that it should be the authentic voice. The broadcasting corporations, like yourselves, should be having channels on these media. So you should have a Twitter channel where this show, once well, should actually be going out simultaneously on Twitter or on X, as much as it is going on TikTok or also on YouTube and other social media platforms. So I think because when you do that, people will know where to get the right information and the authentic information. Somehow, as time goes on, those that spread lies and disinformation will bring themselves down. You will see that those kind of channels, at some point, they will run out of steam and people will move away from them.
True.
Even if you have, your Twitter space, for me, it should be you have your one slot, you broadcast it live, and then you open it up to other people who have been listening, and then you can further discuss for another couple of hours.
All right.
The issues that came out. I think the companies that are in broadcasting, manned by journalists and led by journalists, should be able to take over that space as well.
Temzaka, as always, thank you so much for giving us your time and sharing your thoughts with us on the subject of press freedom.
All right.
And I would say thank you to Professor Kebede, even though we could not establish real contact with him in the course of this conversation. We do appreciate him giving us his time. That's where we wrap things up today. Thank you, as always, for your time. Please remember to share your thoughts on issues discussed using any of our social media handles at News Central TV. Until next time, please be well.